We are live now. Could you please take that off the table, Mr. Whitaker? You can have it on with yourself, but not on the table. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Senate Government Operations Committee. This is Thursday, February 9th, 2023, and we're going to get started. We are running slightly behind because we had senators who were I know they were busy talking to our press tour here at the State House. We're going to get started with Sheriff Roger Marcoux, and we're back on the conversation about dispatch. And we're basically, as you can tell from our agenda, just having a lot of people in to tell us what the situation is in their community, how dispatch works, how it's funded, who covers it, etc. So we can get a lay of the whole state land. So if you're able to just tell us how it works in Lamoille County, that'd be great.
Yep. First of all, Roger Marcoux, Lamoille County Sheriff.
Yep.
And thank you for having me today. And happy to talk about our very successful dispatch service, and it's been successful for long before I arrived. So in Lamoille County, we're a county of about 25,000 people. We have a couple of ski areas with Stowe Mountain Resort and the Smuggler's Notch. So we see quite an influx of people on a daily basis. And Stowe particularly has become a year-round destination point for tourism. So our dispatch center is a public safety answering point, meaning that they are a call taking center for E911. And we handle over 20,000 calls a year, taking calls in for 911. And we dispatch probably 50,000 calls a year. So the regional dispatch started in around 1974, 75. And at that time, the fairly new sheriff in office, Sheriff Minash, had just gone for training with the County of Los Angeles and saw that they had a 911 call taking center there. And he, to his credit, he came back and figured out and worked with the telephone, probably Bell Telephone at the time, how to do that county-wide. And it was one of the first, if not the first, county-wide 911 call taking center in the country, is what I'm told. So the way that was funded at the time was through the county assistant judges, through the county tax dollar. And there became an issue with the town of Stowe not wanting to pay. The other thing attached to that was being paid for was patrol, was the county sheriff's patrol. So Stowe refused to pay their taxes, their county taxes, in protest. And as the right of the sheriff at the time, working with the county judges, they towed the police chief of Stowe's car in lieu of those county tax dollars. So they got kind of tested. Stowe ended up suing Lamoille County, and the basis of that was that you can't use county tax money to force a town that already has a police department and is also paying for the Vermont State Police to pay yet for a third police department. So Stowe lost that case, but they took it to the Supreme Court and they won. So that meant that the Sheriff's Department had to come up with a different mechanism for paying for the dispatch, this county-wide dispatch, which is, it was a coup in itself to have every town sign on. So they did that, and they came up with a formula that we use today. One of the unique things about our department is that every town in the county is dispatched by us. Every piece of apparatus, fire, EMS, police, is dispatched by us. So it's an all-inclusive. So the system that they came up with at the time was taking the grand list and seeing where you fell in the 10 towns in terms of grand lists. And for example, Stowe was like 47, 48%. and then taking the population and doing the same thing. And then merging them together to figure out what percentage of the budget that community pays for. And it was pretty smart of them to recognize that, hey, just because you have the greatest population doesn't mean that you're going to be responsible for or be receiving the greatest number of calls for service. And the same thing with the grand list. So this seemed to be a fair compromise for everybody at the time. And that's got to be at least 45 years old right now. And
It's still in play.
it's still in play. We have a sheriff's advisory committee to the sheriff made up of select board members from each community. And they get together with me and we discuss issues, we discuss future needs, we discuss the budget. And they are advisory to the sheriff, but it doesn't make much sense for the sheriff to go to war with them because they're the ones who are paying the bill.
Yeah.
So it's worked pretty well. With COVID, we saw that since COVID is over, we haven't had many people show up to meetings. So we're working now with, I believe you all know Paco Almond, who's a still select board member. He's going to work with me, and we want to get everybody back at the table and get stuff behind us and keep working. But I just feel very fortunate because to get 10, and it's actually more than that because since I've been there, I've taken on a couple other communities. But I don't know that I could do that today myself, is to get 10 people on the same sheet of music to agree to that. But it's worked very well. So we have a brand new dispatch center, which I'm hoping you're going to see. Brand new as of 09, I think we built it. And it's state of the art, and it does have capacity to take on other communities. We Senator Norris was a sheriff. We helped out his department for a while, and right now, because there was no other choice, we're helping out Orange County because they couldn't get the Department of Public Safety to help them, and I don't know what's going to happen there, but we're the default, we're the stopgap. So.
Okay. So the communities, I know you also dispatch for some entities in Barry
Town. Yes.
How does the funding formula for them work? Is it still the same combination?
No, because once you get out of the county, it becomes difficult. So what we've done is taken a look at the calls for service in Barry Town, and we figured that's very, very close to what Morristown is, and that's kind of what we worked out many years ago. So.
Okay, so it's basically a fee based on per call or number.
Not per call, number
of calls. Okay.
Number of calls. And yes.
Okay, and is that also how you're doing the payments for Orange County?
Orange County is how much money you got. And there was an offer made by Sheriff Boniak, and he left office, and by statute, so I don't get myself into problems, we have to have contracts for anything $2,000 or less than more than 10 days. So we're trying to work out a contract with the sheriff there, but right now he's drinking from the fire hose. So, and we just
brand new.
We just want to stabilize. We've got enough problems. We just want to help him stabilize himself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for doing Orange County. I didn't realize it was falling to you. I thought the state police were doing it, but no, obviously not. Okay.
Well, it's one of the things that has been one of the challenges in Orange County.
Yeah,
So-
Senator Clarkson, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, all of Orange County? You're taking-
Well, the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
Was doing all of Orange County?
Yeah, and right now they are no longer conducting patrol in Randolph.
Right.
So I think Randolph may come up with their own solution for dispatch, but we've been asked, if we would help out with West Fairleigh as well. That's a police department. And so I think if we haven't gotten back to them, we will shortly, that we're going to help them out.
From Thetford to Orange, you're,
I best get down there and see what the lay of the land is.
Yeah. So my question is, thank you for doing this, and it's a great, so it's a regional, it's a county model, but now it's more regional model if you're taking on Orange and Barry and
Well,
other places.
so several years ago, we also took on Hardwick and Greensboro,
So your
which were.
district's a little bigger than just.
Yeah, it's
Right.
basically with technology now, it's the same thing with the Department of Public Safety. They may be located in Williston, but they can, they're dispatching Derby and all around. So with the technology, they can.
So that's part of my question, which is how have you dealt with the technological challenges and how have you upgraded those, the internet and the cell service? And do you have dead spots, and how are you managing the integration as your department has grown in 1974? How have you incorporated? I know you have a state of the art as of 2009, but technology has changed quite a bit since 2000.
The consoles have a life to them. We were fortunate to be involved with the state where we were able to get grant money to upgrade those several years ago. With fiber going around the state, if a department can hit their base radio, well, I'll use the example of Franklin County when we were working with Sheriff Norris at Senator Norris. Either or. So all he had to do was his deputies had to hit the barracks in St. Albans.
Yeah, we put more machinery up there, yeah.
So,
Not too hard.
so from there, it was through microwave and fiber and everything that it went to headquarters. Being part of the PSAP system, we were able to use that infrastructure to be able to talk to his folks without a real. I don't think the deputies knew the difference that we were in Hyde Park as opposed to St. Albans at the time.
But there must be dead spots. It's a pretty mountainous region.
There's
You're
dead spots all over Vermont. Yeah. So, and when we take on a new community, first thing we do is have, in our case, Burlington Communication conduct what's called a promulgation study to see what's the computer modeling saying about where those dead spots are going to be. And dead spots are different for UHF radios that police use and VHF radios that fire and EMS use. So, and I think that is something years ago that we studied statewide, but I think that's one of the statewide things that we must do is determine where the dead spots are. And when you see what the population that affects, who's living there and what have you. And try to come to grips with how can we better serve those communities.
So, do you have a question, Senator White? A couple things. You mentioned statewide, things that you think we should do statewide. So promulgation study and sort of keeping track of where the dead spots are and accommodating those dead spots. What are the other things that you think are the essential functions at the state level versus the regional level? Thank you.
I think that we have a small state. And I think that the partnership between the Department of Public Safety and the rest of the locals, including the sheriffs, is of paramount importance. I've been here through 9/11, through Katrina down in Louisiana, through Irene, and there's lessons that were learned there that I think are lost now. And first thing is if you're going to respond to a disaster of any kind, man-made or natural, there needs to be excellent communication, training that goes with that, and equipment. So I anticipated the question, and I will tell you what I think and what I would do if I were the commissioner.
Okay, I love to hear that.
So first of all, the Department of Public Safety is the best funded law enforcement first responder agency in the state. They should be the default for any communities that, for whatever reason, lose their dispatch capability. This is particularly important if there's a disaster. I think that communities that are utilizing the Department of Public Safety should pay. So we were on track with a formula here several years ago, and then somehow we got off the rails from community should pay DPS to DPS that don't dispatch them at all. So I think it's fair that that every agency pays something. So I think that we were in a very, very good shape in this state.
So could you just clarify agency? When you say
Fire.
agency, do you mean also town or county or?
How about if I say first responder agency, so it could be fire, EMS, police.
So you think every agency should pay, not every
Town.
town?
Yeah, because
So-
that's what, that was my question. When you used the word agency, were you meaning town?
So sometimes I'm asked, are you willing to dispatch for this fire department, this fire agency?
Mhm.
But the same town EMS is somewhere else.
Mhm.
So in my case, in Lamoille County, everybody's together,
Mhm.
but that's not always the case.
Okay,
So anybody utilizing the services,
Okay, anyone
entity,
utilizing.
any entity.
okay. Senator Bukowski?
So my concern with that, and it comes from some of what I've heard from Essex Rescue particularly, and the fact that they've now come to the town 2 years in a row because of shortfalls in their budget, because of the way federally they are not moved into the same funding stream as other essential services. And so I wonder in instances, particularly around rescue, how we navigate that, given that so many of our rescue organizations are operating in the red every year.
Hardwick Rescue was the first out of those communities to come to us for dispatching services. I think it's pretty important for anybody that's going to be in the first responder business, that part of that is in your budget. When you're building a budget, dispatching is part of it.
Yes.
So, because there's no grants or sustainable sources of money to, to sustain the operations. So
Mhm.
if we're not going to do this as a state, if we're not going to say the state's going to pick up all of the dispatching fees, then I've seen a lot of sheriff's departments get in trouble because they're out there with the cars and their guns and handcuffs and everything, but they didn't consider about who's going to dispatch you. And did you think about that when you put your budget together?
So, thank you for making this distinction. Is there an argument that all of the first responder agencies in a particular municipality should be on the same dispatch? Is that something that we should require, or is there not value to that?
I would not get into the weeds that deep because you have some, particularly EMS, that are in the business of not only going and taking medical calls and everything, but as a business, to help support the business, they do a lot of transportation and use Medicare or whatever that is, dollars to do that. So I've never thought of that question, so that's off the top of my head. That's how I would respond to it.
Because I'm just thinking about, I don't want to pick a town because I'm sure there are complications with whatever town I pick. But let's say, Ruth Town. If I had a fire and police and ambulance service, or maybe 2 ambulance services in my town, could there be problems if all 4 of those entities have different dispatchers?
That's what I really appreciate about our community is that many towns, the fire and EMS are on the same radio frequency.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you go to an accident, so they're working with their local police department. And, it really works well for us to have everybody together.
Right. I think we heard last week when Essex was in, they're working together with Williston and they're on the same radio frequency, and they're also on the same, they have all the radio frequencies of agencies surrounding them so that they can help with mutual aid. And they were talking about how helpful that was. So it actually didn't occur to me that within the same town, you could have multiple dispatchers and how that might be possible, but also problematic. Yeah. Senator Clarkson, go ahead.
I thought, Roger, that you said earlier that all fire was on VHF frequency and all EMS or whoever the other, I don't remember, police or EMS are on UHF. So that's not on the same frequency. Are you saying that all your departments are on one of those? Or are they,
Yeah,
do those speak to each other?
So it's police for UHF, EMS, fire on VHF, very high frequency. Yeah, so maybe I didn't clarify that real well. Fire and EMS, most of the towns have their own frequency, but they have a mutual aid channel, like in our.
Okay.
So.
And that
if they were seeing
supersedes
fire was,
them?
I'm sorry.
Does the mutual aid channel supersede those?
Well, if you've got a town of Hyde Park has a fire, they can operate on their channel, but if they're helping Johnson or another community on
Then
mutual
it
aid,
goes.
then they'll go to mutual aid.
Okay.
And it's like us in police work, we have what's called state two, which is car to car. And if we're working with state police and everything, we may make a decision to go to state two, or there's tactical channels now and just a bunch of real technical stuff.
Unfortunately, we're behind. So are you sticking around or do you have another meeting or thing you have to go to?
I'm here,
You're here, okay.
I'm here for the afternoon.
Okay, if you're here for the afternoon, if we can move to the people who are, and maybe we'll come back to you, is that good?
Yeah.
The other thing that would be helpful, since you anticipated some of the questions we were gonna ask you, is if you could write up your recommendations.
Because I didn't get to the big one.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna
oh,
say.
yeah,
we
okay,
only got
so-
to the first two.
Yeah, we have people waiting on Zoom, so we'll come back to you to get to the big one, and then if you wanna
If
write.
you
them-
haven't come back to me by 5, can I go home?
Yes, we'll be done. I mean, you'll be sitting right here. We'll see how long it takes people to go through and then we'll get you back. Bob, can you wait on
Just-
your question?
Yeah,
or-
it was just a quick question, give me time to think
Okay.
about it. For the committee's perspective, can you at least tell us or come up with a figure that is the operation you presently have in place as to what do you have actually invested in that operation?
Yeah, and that was, because we heard last week about St. Albans has invested a lot in their operation and they have a lot of different, so that would be helpful to get. All right, we'll come back to you, Roger. Thank
So
you. And
this-
you can hang at the table with us because everybody else is on Zoom. So if you want to do that, it's fine. So we have.
Much safer.
You can, no, he's in the witness chair, but you can hang out with us, and Travis Bingham is the next person. Chief Bingham, are you there? Chief Bingham, we can see that you're on the screen, but we can't, there you are, awesome.
I am
Thank
here.
you so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we're behind schedule and that you are waiting. We are talking today about dispatch. I'm gonna just quickly go around and tell you who you're talking to, just to save a little time. I'm Ruth Hardy from Addison County, Tanya Bihosky from Chittenden Central, Becca White from Windsor, Bob Norris from Franklin, Ann Watson from Washington, Allison Clarkson from Windsor. And Olivia Parker is our committee assistant who keeps us running. And we have Roger Marcoux hanging out with us this afternoon as well. We're just interested to hear how dispatch works in Newport. Who does your dispatch? Is it working? How's it paid for, et cetera? And anything you think we should know from your perspective in our attempts to try to make a more uniform system for the state.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thanks for having me.
Sure.
So I'll just start with like a quick little history.
Well, first introduce yourself for the record, even though we know who you are.
Yes. Travis Bingham, the chief at Newport Police Department. So we, like most other small agencies, had our own dispatch in-house for since the time that I've been here. And that consisted of 2 dispatchers that went from 7 a to 11 p.m. And then after those hours, we relied on state police to cover our basically after hours and weekends. In 2015, the PSAP started closing down, and Derby was one of those PSAPs that dissolved during that process. And it became apparent at that point, even though the talk about regionalization happened well before I was probably even alive. So once that happened in Derby, we realized that we probably should start doing something to take care of ourselves, our own department, and other agencies in the area. So in 2016, we actually applied for a grant through Homeland Security. That grant was for $280,000, and that allowed us to put the infrastructure in place to dispatch for not only ourselves, which we already had, but for all the EMS, all the fire, and the county sheriff's departments that is in this county now. So we did utilize grant money to get that infrastructure up and running, and then currently still using it. Out of the gate, agencies were reluctant to come on board with us, obviously, because they were getting it for free through state police, which, we didn't really solicit agencies to come on with us. It was kind of like a organic process, I guess you can say, like, hey, if you're ready, come, we have the ability to dispatch for you, but by no means are we pressuring anybody to do this at that point. And right out of the gate, we actually had a few agencies. Irisburg Fire was one of them, very small. They do about 40 calls a year. They came on board with us. Newport Ambulance is probably the biggest EMS agency in this area. They came on board with us out of the gate. And that was it for quite a few years. It was just us, Newport City Fire, Newport Ambulance, and Irisburg Fire. We did not have like a really good fee structure in place at that time to say, okay, we're going to charge you based on this, this, and this. It cost us $280,000 to do this. There's 28 agencies. We're going to charge each agency $10,000. And that's how we came up with the fee structure at that point in time.
Okay.
There's not 28 agencies anymore in Orleans County. Some of them have either, dissolved, gone away, or they've combined with other. But that's how the original fee structure was put together. So just to fast forward a little bit more, around 2019-ish or 18, we actually went 24/7 dispatch on our own. We hired 4 dispatchers full time. We did 24/7 at that point, and we were free and clear from anything that the state had to offer, specifically for Newport Police and those other agencies that came on around that time frame. As this, the regionalization kind of got more traction, and the last year or so really started to kind of say, okay, it looks like there is a deadline for this to happen. That's when the agencies started kind of reach out to me, and I realized at that point that I had to come up with some kind of fee structure that they could go back to their towns and say, okay, this is how they are going to charge us. This is why they are going to charge us. And it's not just a flat rate of $10,000 because the chief said so. So did a little digging, a little research, talked to Sheriff Marcoux a little bit about all this. I ended up going with a model that's very similar to what St. J has in place now. And it's really just based on your call volume for a 4-year average. And I keep that call volume rolling over the 4 years, dispersed amongst the total dispatch budget that I have. So you're essentially getting charged for the use of our dispatch services. There is an admin fee that goes with that. Anything under 200 calls is a flat $2,000. Anything over 200 calls is $3,000. And then I take the percentage and plug it in. So currently we have 19 agencies total that we're dispatching for here in Newport. We have 5 full-time dispatchers to cover those. I do try to overlap dispatch services or dispatchers during the busy time, which normally is 11 A to 11 P for any agency. That's the busiest time. I have kind of worked out myself and Sheriff Harlow in Orleans County. They have their own dispatch Monday through Friday, and then we cover their after hours and weekend calls for them. 2 days a week, they have a dispatcher that actually comes down to our office and sits in here as a dispatcher at a Newport PD still paid for by the sheriff's department, but is another dispatcher down here. So we have a little bit of overlap just to help cover the calls. Last year we did, for 2022, about just under 12,000 calls that came into Newport. And like I said, most of the stuff that we're doing for dispatching is EMS and fire. We're the only police department 24/7 in Orleans County. The sheriff's department, we do cover for them, and the state police obviously have their own dispatch services. So, dispatching for fire and EMS is a much different animal than dispatching for police departments because it's just much more involved. So I would say that we're at a comfortable place. I have had people approach me about, maybe possibly wanting to start police services or, what that would look like. And I'm not going to say that, we wouldn't be able to expand, but we are at a comfortable place where we're at right now in Newport with the services that we have. And we essentially have every single agency, I think, except for 2 that are dispatching through us in Orleans County.
Okay, so you cover the entire county except for 2 agencies, and that you use the same fee to charge all of them for their dispatch?
Correct.
I have a question that just came to me while you were talking, and do all the dispatch calls, I think I know the answer to this, but do all the dispatch calls that come through for 911, or do you have to dispatch for people who might just call your regular line?
Yeah, no, so the answer to that is yes, people will call the regular line directly to us. Most of the calls do come in through 911. We are not a 911 answering point. So 911 calls go to wherever they're picked up at, and then they're transferred to us if they're in our area. But people do have direct access and will use our direct line sometimes.
Okay. And so you work, does the failover, if you're not able to dispatch, you are the failover for the sheriff's office, the department, yes? And then is it the state for you if you can't answer?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Do you have something that lays out what your formula is, or do you have a contract example or something you could send us that would show sort of what you're giving to agencies that are contracting with you for services?
Yeah, I can give you a copy of the fee schedule, and it's updated every January basically because we use calendar year for the calls for this schedule. So it's just been updated, and these basically the fees that are on here won't go in effect until the following year. And my thought process there is to give people time to go to the town meetings. It doesn't change a whole lot because it's a 4-year average, so there's not like a huge jump in price or a huge decrease in the price. So but I can certainly send that along to you. You guys can look at it and any questions you have, and then I can send you a copy of one of the contracts as well, what that looks like.
Yeah, that would be great. If you could send it along to Olivia, and any other information that you have would be helpful.
Okay.
Senator Clarkson, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Travis. I'm just a little puzzled when you say you don't accept 911 calls. How do you not accept the 911 call if you're a dispatch center?
Well, we're not a 911 answering point. So like if somebody dials 911, that call.
It goes to 911.
It goes to 911, I get that, but doesn't 911 go straight to you if it's in your area?
Then they would transfer it to us.
Right, oh, okay, so then you were just meaning different things. I thought all 911 went in straight to 911 and then got dispatched out to all of you, whoever was whoever was responsible for that territory.
Yes.
Yeah, so when you were saying we don't accept 911 calls, I didn't understand that. Okay, now I understand. You do. Straight from 911.
Yes.
Yes.
Are there other questions for the chief? Okay, this is really helpful. Are there things that you want us to know about if we are trying to sort of standardize the system across the state? We don't want to mess with things that are working. It sounds like it's working for you, but we do want to try to find equity and consistency across the state. And how do you have any advice or thoughts for us on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's perfect. It's never perfect, right? But I think one of the bigger gaps that we see and like is some of the infrastructure at some point is going to have to be upgraded. There's, just the geography of the land in this area, like there's dead spots. So obviously, like we're going to have at some point, we're going to need towers put in mostly in the southern part of the county because we have a hard time reaching down to Greensboro, which is where Orleans County patrols. So there's definitely gaps as far as some of that coverage area goes, based on the lay of the land. But I mean, the response and, after people in the agencies had switched over to local dispatch, it's been received very well. It's worked well. And, I think overall the dispatch being provided locally has been a benefit to this area.
And how did you convince them to come to you and get off the state's dispatch?
I honestly, I didn't really convince them. It was, I think, more or less like within the last year when state police was just really having a hard time filling seats in dispatch. And they said, look, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. We're going to get to the point where we're going to break down. We're not going to be able to provide services anymore. And I think that that point's when the chiefs and other agencies said, okay, we have to have some kind of plan. Like we can't not provide services. So I think it was the realization of, okay, this is really going to happen. And now we have an option to get dispatch out of Newport. Let's do it. So I really didn't honestly go out and solicit anybody because I didn't want to do that anyways. Like I knew it was going to have to be kind of an organic process on their end.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's great to hear. Senator Clarkson.
Sorry, what I meant to ask you about, Travis, is what we've also heard from other dispatch is burnout and workforce challenges. How many people do you employ? What is the morale? What's the workforce? How are you doing? And what's your pay situation?
Yeah, so we're currently going through contract negotiations right now. So I think that's really going to help out. Policing wise, we're 14 staffed and we're at 14. I have one part-timer that we utilize. Dispatch, we're slated for 5 and actually just lost one full-time dispatcher within the last week because of pay. They're definitely, it's tough recruiting when you say, hey, come work nights, weekends, and holidays, and you're going to be sitting in, a chair for 12 hours. It's the incentive isn't always there, but we're working on it. And I think with the new contract, it's going to help a little bit. So overall, staffing wise, we're doing pretty well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Chief. Oh, we have one more question.
Thank you. So you mentioned that dispatching for police is, I think you might have said something like it's a different animal or it's like a different thing because it's a little bit more intense. So you don't have a different rate for dispatching for police, is that correct?
No, that is correct. It's all based on call volume and the 4-year average. Yeah, it's not a different rate at all.
Okay, so in as we were thinking about our work here, do you think we should be considering a different rate for police because it may be more involved, or is it simpler to just keep it as one? This is form with other agencies.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think it's simpler to keep it as one. But just for like an example, like if you have an officer that goes out on a traffic stop, right? So, as a dispatcher, your responsibility is to make sure that that officer is safe and they keep communicating with you. Then they're going to run a license check, a registration check. They might do warrants check. They might have stolen property. Like when you dispatch fire and EMS, for the most part, you dispatch them to the initial call, and then you might have contact with them maybe once or twice throughout depending on what the incident is. And then you're done. So it's just, with policing, it's just different because you have to have that constant contact. And as a dispatcher, it takes up a lot more time. That's all.
Got you. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick?
Really quick, we're way behind.
But yeah, quick question, and maybe Roger can also answer it for you, Travis, as we go through this, which is call volume. How can you base all your compensation on call volume when call volume must shift, by population, by circumstance, by disaster? How do you do that? It's not consistent. It doesn't strike me.
You would be surprised, and when you look at this fee schedule I'll send you, it doesn't vary a whole lot from year to year. There is some dips and dives, but the 4-year average kind of takes care of that. But honestly, it's pretty close.
Okay,
Interesting.
that's great
Thanks.
to hear. I really look forward to looking at that. I love
Yeah.
formula, so send it along. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Chief Bingham, and we appreciate it. And we'll let you know if we need you to come back later to talk to us again.
Okay,
Have a good day.
thank you all.
Thank you. All right, so we have Will Moran, hopefully, and if you want to let people in so that they're there when we need to shift, that's fine too, as long as they're muted. So. Hey, Will.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. Sorry, we're running late. We're having a lot of good conversation about dispatching, and I can't remember. Have you been in to talk with us yet? You have.
Yeah, so I briefly testified a week or two ago, and it was more of just an introduction. It's a new group today, and as compared to the folks that we spoke often with last year. And so we used the opportunity just as an icebreaker. So
Excellent. So you know who we are and we know who you are. So if you could tell us from your perspective, and I know that you're within the Department of Health,
correct.
what your thoughts are as we're trying to figure out how do we make a more uniform, reliable system for dispatching across the state.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Madam Chair and to all the senators sitting on the committee, it is my pleasure to be here today and to have an opportunity to share with you my thoughts on this topic. As you know, or may know, my background is in emergency services. I've been a firefighter and a paramedic for more than 20 years, as well as a service chief and now a state regulator within the health department that oversees the emergency medical services system. And so, I want to just take a moment to recognize the Department of Health does not regulate the communication system. The Department of Health does not fund the communication system. And my goal of being here today is certainly not to muddy the waters. My goal for being here today is actually just to approach this conversation from a slightly different angle. And, I've been listening to testimony on this topic since last year. And oftentimes what I hear, folks, is really focusing in on this idea of dispatch. For someone like myself, who is a responder, I rely upon a communication system to help me do my work, right? When we oftentimes use this word dispatch, well, when I think of dispatch is just one of many functions that we rely upon a communication system to perform. But there are many other functions that are essential as part of a 21st century communication system. And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today, because from my point of view, and as someone who has been a responder for many years and someone who continues to advocate for those systems that we should look to, what I hope to share with you today is a little bit of a view of really what we should be looking for in a 21st century solution to this topic of emergency communication systems. So there's a few things that I would highlight. The first is, 21st century communication systems are really integrated systems that serve several different groups. The first is the public, right? It's a single point that they can reach out to report a situation, to report a medical emergency, to report a fire or a crime. But as I began to explain before, for the emergency responders, for the folks on the ambulances, for the folks that are staffing fire trucks and law enforcement units, right? That is the point for which information is received. That is the point for which that information is evaluated. And that is the point for ultimately there are decisions made around assigning available resources that are the appropriate response to whatever the situation is, right? So those systems receive information, they evaluate the information. The 21st century communication systems, right? 21st century computer-aided dispatch systems also monitor and identify the available units without the need for a person, an individual, to have an idea in their own head about what resources are out there across the community, right? When we think about 21st century computer-aided dispatching systems, it's the technology itself that is monitoring the resources and making those resources that are available rapidly identifiable to the dispatcher, who then selects from the list what might be the closest unit or what might be the most appropriate unit to respond to whatever the problem is. And I'll take a moment just to highlight a couple of examples of that. So when I've spent time in what I would consider to be modern dispatch centers, you have oftentimes, rows of what we refer to as call takers, right? So these are highly trained communication staff who receive that 911 call, right? They are answering the public's call, they're rapidly taking down information, and they're utilizing standardized protocols to classify the incident. Once that incident is classified, it's electronically pushed to the dispatcher. The dispatcher is notified that the emergency is there and now in the system. And the dispatcher then relies upon the system, which is automatically recommending the closest appropriate units to respond to that emergency. What's different about that, as compared to what we often see across the state today, is that you'll have a call taker who takes that information, and then they're utilizing the system to recommend who they are to reach out to, right? It's the emergency is located in this community. That's whom I now have to call, right? Pick up the phone, dial a number, or select, perhaps they're pushing a button and it dials the number for them, but then they're taking that information and they're transferring it utilizing voice communications to someone else. And it's this, and it is a system where you're relying upon one person to talk to another to transfer that information. And it's in those interactions that are both inefficient from a time standpoint, but then potentially dangerous from the standpoint of the loss of really important and vital information, right? That could be as a result of, someone just not communicating precisely what they heard, or, leaving out vital information that was part of the original call. So when we compare that to what I have observed in modern communication systems, is that when the call takers take that information, it's all recorded electronically, and that information is pushed rapidly to the dispatcher. That information is displayed on the screen. The system itself is identifying the closest appropriate units, and the dispatcher then selects from those units the units that they are going to dispatch. So those are just a couple of the qualities that I'll begin by highlighting. Then when I think about a modern communication system and something that I would urge you to think about, I would also urge you to consider the folks that are in the field, right? So those responders, those paramedics and EMTs, those firefighters, law enforcement and officers who are relying upon the communication specialists to be that vital link for them. They're the vital link that's providing them updated information. They're that vital link that when they can't find an address, they're going back to the dispatch center that's utilizing every bit of information they have at their fingertips to find that piece of information the responder needs in the field. And they're utilizing that information in such a way where the paramedic on the side of the road or the firefighter in the fire truck isn't flipping through books, right? Isn't jumping on the internet. The communication center is utilizing all of that information that's, really at its fingertips to support the folks that are out there in the field doing the work. So those are some of the qualities that we should be looking for when we're imagining the future of emergency communications in the state. Much of this technology already exists today. Much of this technology is already utilized and has been for many, many years in other parts of the countries, or in other parts of the country. We see today in law enforcement vehicles, mobile data terminals. You don't see mobile data terminals located in fire trucks. You don't see mobile data terminals located in ambulances, right? So every time there's a transfer of information between the communication center and that emergency response unit, it's all voice communication. And that is inefficient. Oftentimes there are inaccuracies. And because of the challenges we have around electronic communications in the state of Vermont due to geography, oftentimes it's difficult to hear. So there's oftentimes what you're hearing is, can you repeat that information? Can you say that again? When in other modern dispatch systems, they're pushing that information electronically. It's not requiring voice communications. I've heard many folks testify about the impact of increased workload on the dispatchers themselves. Well, imagine a system where when you're taking this information in and you're entering that information into the electronic system, the system is automatically pushing that information out to a mobile data terminal in the fire truck or in the ambulance, and it's efficiently and effectively transferring that information to the individuals. It not only increases the speed at which responders are receiving that information, it's also reducing the errors associated with the electronic communication struggles we have due to geography. It also reduces errors because I may hear it differently than the person sitting next to me. And it allows responders to better respond to the needs of the community in a more rapid and efficient way. It's also a means of securely transferring information, right? And oftentimes this information, is considered protected health information. So when you can do that in such a way where we're utilizing technology to push this information from one computer system to another, it allows for a certain degree of privacy for those folks who are likely encountering the worst day of their lives, and they don't need to worry about their neighbor who might be listening to their scanner and hearing all about the medical emergency that is playing out in their home. The last thing that I'll just take a moment to highlight is that over the course of my career, when we look at the after action reports of various types of emergency responses, it is interoperability between the fire service and EMS, interoperability between law enforcement and the fire service, or interoperability between law enforcement and EMS that is often highlighted as a contributing factor that had an adverse impact on the ability of responders to effectively respond. So from a 21st century communication system, we know that we can address those interoperability problems between responders, but we also know there's an opportunity to make the connections between the data systems that we rely upon. And I'll just sort of share with you a very brief example of that. So one of the systems that EMS professionals utilize is referred to as an electronic patient care record, or a PCR, right? That's the communication tool that we use, which is an electronic record. That is the report that we provide to our hospital counterparts. It's the report that when the public requests a record for what was the care that was provided to them, it's where all of that information is captured. In a 21st century communication system that has interoperability with the other systems that we utilize within the emergency medical services system, those connections are automated. So if I'm the paramedic in the ambulance, when the dispatch center electronically pushes a call to me, right, and it doesn't even need to necessarily go by voice, it can all be transferred electronically, which reduces the workload on the dispatcher and the paramedic in the truck. It's not only communicating to me the circumstances around the emergency event that's currently happening, but it's also automatically communicating with my electronic patient care reporting system and auto-populating that information. So at the end of the call, when I need to go through all of my documentation activities, much of the information that was collected by the dispatch center is already present in my electronic patient care report. One of the metrics that we pay very close attention to in the emergency medical services system is how long does it take from the time an ambulance team turns a patient over in the emergency department to the receiving team to when they're able to return to service. And I would say, within the industry, it is reasonable to say it takes about 20 minutes, right? So you need to, take all of your equipment, including the stretcher, you need to clean it, you need to restock, and you need to do all of your documentation. Well, in today's system, I'd have to somehow receive all of the vital information that was collected by the dispatch center, either through an email or perhaps by picking up the phone, right? Which is inefficient and an additional work. It's just an additional workload on our dispatchers. And I need to get and make sure I have the information around what was included in the dispatch. I need all of the times. I need the patient's address and any other relevant information that was transferred, right? And that either comes to me by voice because the dispatcher is communicating that to me directly over the phone, or it's been put into an email, which is another system I need to reach into to pull information out of, and then transfer that information by typing it from one system to another, which is highly inefficient and makes us more, there is a greater likelihood for encountering errors when you're moving information from one electronic system to another. So imagine these systems today that we could be utilizing here in Vermont, where those processes are automated, where we're utilizing technology to reduce the workload on the folks in the communication center and the workload of those folks who are out there performing these essential duties. During my time as a paramedic, I would oftentimes, I would get back to the fire station and we would have just run 5 back-to-back emergency calls, right? So I would have 5 electronic patient care reports to write. I can tell you, as someone who hears often from our, emergency medical services practitioners across the state, they oftentimes, they complain to us about the length of time it takes to write a patient care report. Well, imagine if a third of that report was already complete because our systems that we invested in automatically transfer that information and import it from the dispatch system directly into the electronic patient care reporting system, right? Those systems, senators, exist today. That technology has been utilized in other systems in other states for many years. And for those of us who have had the opportunity to go work in those locations, I can tell you, when I was working in a very busy urban EMS system where we did upwards of 14 calls in 12 hours, we relied heavily upon those types of systems to allow us to do our work efficiently and effectively and accurately. So that's what I want to share with you today, right? So you're imagining we can have here in the state of Vermont, and you're imagining what our first responders need. That's just a very brief sort of mosaic of what's possible. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, Will, thank you so much. You've blown our minds a little bit, or at least mine. I only speak for myself. Thank you. And first of all, I want to ask you, do you have that written down?
Yeah.
Were you recording it while you were going so it could be automatically put into the PCR?
So I do not have this written down, but I will refer you actually to the report submitted by the work group. And much of what I described to you today is very similar to the testimony that I gave last year on this topic. And that is memorialized in the dispatch work group. It's on page 54 of the 55-page report. So. Okay.
Olivia, can you find that and we'll clip it for us? Will, first of all, thank you for that. And a couple of senators have questions.
Sure.
Did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was just trying to understand, that sounds great. All of that sounds great. I don't know what strategies we would employ that would use that best.
Right.
This dispatch. So perhaps you could posit if you have an answer to that question as we move forward. Or maybe if you don't have an answer to that question, maybe we can have you come back and tell us.
I think it would be best to probably come back with a better answer for you than sort of providing one off the cuff today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, how do you recommend we get there for the whole state?
Yeah.
And how much would that cost and who should be in charge of making sure that happens?
Right. Yeah, and I'll just take a moment to speak to that. I think it's important to recognize that much of emergency communications across the state of Vermont is decentralized. When we talk about the number of PSAP centers we have had historically, when we talk about the number of dispatch centers that we currently have today, that fall under any number of different jurisdictions, right? It's going to be very difficult to, I think, obtain that level of performance across the statewide system. Unless, right, there is a spark, right? There is a spark lit by those folks who provide us those communication centers, working collaboratively with the folks that in the teams that they serve in their regions to say, you know, we need to provide communication services, we need to provide a record keeping service, but from the user's perspective, we also need these other types of functionality integrated into the system. And you know, I do not perceive the goal of the legislature and others to disrupt those systems that are already working. But you know, from my perspective, we should be urging folks to consider what is possible and to consider how we stand up against our near peers. And how are we doing? You know, if we were to evaluate the effectiveness of our communication systems, how do we compare? How well are we serving the public? How well are we serving our responders? And are there opportunities to do it better? Now, that's going to take a lot of investment. That's going to take a lot of, you know, common vision and agreement upon what type of services are possible. You know, from my perspective, and you know, representing a department that really doesn't have, you know, any skin in this game, you know, I would love to be and would welcome the opportunity to be part of conversations that help folks imagine what is possible and identifying opportunities to improve our performance. You know, and I'm happy to think about, you know, how to get there, right? How to afford something like that, how to establish that common level of performance.
Yeah.
You know, do I have a great answer about how we do that today? I don't, but it's something that I would welcome the opportunity to put some thought into.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ask you to put some thought into it.
Sure.
And you know, let us know what you come up with, and you know how our timeline works here.
Yes.
So trying to get a bill out before crossover that sets up a structure for moving forward with a statewide system that is respectful of what we have in place that's working.
Right.
And starts to fix some of the problems that don't work. So if you can think about that question and let us know when you're ready to come back and share it with us, or react to what we come up with, that would be helpful. We have one more question, and then unfortunately I'm gonna have to move on to the next person. So Senator Clarkson.
So I've heard this vision before, Will, and it's great to hear it again. And it's a real call to action. The question is, this has to exist somewhere already.
Mm-hmm.
What other state?
Oh, Senator Clarkson, so what other states do you think we could look to, or communities that have what your vision is?
Yeah. So I would be happy to provide you a list. I can, the first one I would point to would be areas of the state of Michigan that I worked in that had highly effective and highly modern communication systems, specifically in Washtenaw County, which is in southeastern Michigan, just to the west of Detroit. You know, I think when you look at many of our urban systems that rely upon, you know, highly technological dispatch systems that manage a finite number of resources, but also respond to tremendously high call volumes, right? Those systems rely upon technology to help them load balance the system against the available resources they have. So if you're looking for a list of systems that I could present as systems to compare ourselves to, I'd be happy to pull that together. They certainly exist, and much of what I described to you today would be no mystery to those folks. And those are systems they've been utilizing for quite some time.
Right. And I think the difference, though, that another witness has pointed out to me is that Vermont has maybe lower call volume, but we have more complex systems because we have so many little entities that need to be dispatched.
Correct.
You know, like 8 million little ambulance, fire, and police departments across the state. Maybe not 8 million, that might be. We have a lot of them. And so the complexity in Vermont is different than the complexity in a larger urban area. So if you have ideas for a more rural area that has the similar kinds of challenges that is using what you're talking about, that would be helpful too. So, but Will, thank you so much. I think the best thing about your testimony was your enthusiasm for it. And I really appreciated that. And I look forward to having you back, and send us along any ideas. You can send them to Olivia.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Madam Chair. And to the Senators of the group, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And I will look forward to speaking with you soon.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
All right.
Have a good afternoon.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay, so next we have Scott Cooney, who's the fire chief in Hartford. We are doing a little like trip around the state, just sitting right here in the ops room.
All the fossil fuels are not burned. People
Exactly.
coming in.
That's true. Chief Cooney, hi. How are you?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. So we are going to introduce ourselves really quickly, and then you can introduce yourselves because there are two of you there. So and then if you could tell us how things work in Hartford, what your system is like, how it's funded, how it operates, what's going well, and then your thoughts on our project of creating more consistency and reliability across the state for everybody. That would be great. So I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I represent the Addison District.
Olivia Parker, Committee Assistant.
Senator Kennedy hosts Chittenden Central.
Hi, it's Becca White, Windsor County District.
Senator Bob Norris, Franklin County.
Senator Ann Watson from Washington District.
And your other senator, Senator Clarkson, had to leave the room for a minute, but I'm sure she'll be back. And we also have Roger Marcoux hanging out with us this afternoon at the table. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves and take it away?
Oh, excellent. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today. And I had an opportunity to speak to your prior speakers too. But my name is Scott Cooney. I'm the fire chief here in Hartford. I've been with the Hartford Fire Department for 27 years now. So I've had an opportunity to see the iterations of dispatch kind of evolve over the years. And we're going to talk about that today. And with me today is Scott Smith. He is the director of our communications center here in Hartford, and he's here to help me out if I stumble along the way. But he's here joining with us today.
Great. Well, thank you. Go ahead.
All right. So a little bit about Hartford. Actually, your previous speaker, Will Moran, did a great explanation of CAD systems and dispatching software and waves of the future. And what he did was describe the system that we're using here in Hartford. So pretty proud of that fact. Additionally, I think a similar system is being run in the city of Burlington. And I believe the city of South Burlington is looking at one of these computer-aided software systems, dispatching software systems as well. The town of Hartford operates a municipally funded emergency communications center. So it's funded by our general fund. We do collect revenue from the dispatch center, and I will go over that in a moment. But that offsets costs and expenses and taxes. It appears on the revenue side of the budget. We dispatch for 11 different communities, 12 fire departments, 5 EMS agencies, 3 fast squads, 3 police departments, and we're looking to expand our services to 3 additional police agencies. Hartford is state E911 PSAT, so we do call answering here at our communications center. We own and operate the Stillman Flex Motorola computer-aided dispatching software. It's the system that the state used to possess. We own an upgraded version of that. We also use the Phoenix G2 station alerting system that allows us to do autonomous automation of dispatching for emergencies. So as Will Moran described, as the dispatcher is call taking an emergency here in Hartford, and they're doing the data entry into the CAD system, it automatically identifies the computer identifies what communities it's occurring in, what the nature of the call emergency is, what the responsible agencies are, what units are available to respond, and transmits that message electronically to the station where an automated voice dispatches the agency and the dispatcher never has to release the call. So, for example, you hear a Siri voice in the fire station dispatching those units to respond to the emergency, where the call taker is uninterrupted from continuing their phone conversations. Right now, we're only doing that automation for Hartford Municipal Services. We have not expanded that to the other agencies yet, but we are looking to do that in the future. I sent you some slides. I'm kind of referring to those as we go through, but Hartford, our call volumes probably in the center in the 20,000 range annually. They provide around the clock telephone, computers, dispatching services to police, fire, and EMS units. And our average stays about the same over the last 5 years.
Wait, can I interrupt you for just a second, Chief? You just mentioned you sent some slides in, and they are on our website. So if people do want to look at them, that's great. Thank you. Carry on. I just want to make senators to know that.
Hi, Scott.
Hi there. You're very welcome. The way dispatch is funded is through a fee schedule, and you can see on one of the slides is a pie chart that shows the municipality pays for about $750,000 worth of the communication center costs. We contract, our contract revenue is about $442,000, and we bring in anywhere between 90 to 190 projected from E911 services that are funded by the state of Vermont back to the town of Hartford. Our center operates at about a $1.3 million budget that pays for a PSAP manager, administrator. It pays for 9 full-time communications specialists. We have 1 communications information systems coordinator, so that's a specific IT support for the center to manage the CAD dispatching software and to do the updates that are necessary for the multiple fire, EMS, and police agencies that need to be managed in the system, as well as other fees and services that are required to make the dispatch center work. So so communication lines that are coming in and out of the center, it pays for the fiber optic services that are going out to the multiple towers that are used for the dispatch channels, and it pays for some interconnectivity between the towers and backup systems. On our slide 5, I believe, I gave you a copy of what our fee schedule looks like. This is how Hartford comes to dividing up the costs for contracts within our contract communities. Basically, we take the entire operating budget for that fiscal year. We back out the fees that are reimbursed from the state of Vermont, and then that becomes our dynamic budget. Now we know, should we lose all our contracts, that Hartford still needs to maintain 5 dispatchers on duty just to handle this municipality. So we back out that cost from the dynamic fees. We pull 35% of that, and that's just town of Hartford costs. And then we bill out the remaining 65% in the dynamic fee schedule. And that's basically based on their calls for service for the prior year, plus an administrative fee that's on the total dynamic budget at 1.5% of that. And we bill those administrative fees as a whole to each agency that participates, to each community that participates. And that is how we generate our fees on an annual basis.
Smart.
Guess I'm open for questions now, if you have them.
Okay. Senator White, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chief Cooney. It's lovely to see you, and these presentations look very familiar. One question for you around the fee schedule. So as we're envisioning what dispatch could look like what it could look like for us as a state and that bigger question. I see that you break out like Weathersfield and Royalton and South Royalton and Chester and Windsor for that fact. You split it up based on the different departments. And I think one of the questions I have is if we as a state should be looking at each town or if we should be looking at each town's individual departments as we develop a structure. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the benefits of how you've done it, pros and cons kind of thing.
Sure. I think the reason why we break it out primarily is because most of these municipalities have budgets for each specific department. So for example, if we're looking at South Royalton, their police department, their fire department, their rescue squad may have a different budget line in their general fund. So they want to know what their portion of the cost to support the administration fee and the dispatch fee would be.
Okay.
That's primarily why it's broken up. But if the municipalities general fund budget's paying for it, they're just
okay. So it's not necessarily a different type of service depending on what department or breakout of departments the town has. It's just based on how they call it out in their budget. Is that
correct? Yeah, we're providing them to see the specifics to what department is affected from the communication center.
okay? It's not. Okay. That makes more sense. Thank you.
And I assume some of the entities you dispatch for are nonprofit organizations. They're not municipal. Is that right? Some of the EMS and fire in particular?
That is correct. Some of them.
So they wouldn't be part of their town budget necessarily.
Correct.
It depends.
Yeah, okay. Senator Watson.
Well, so on that point, I guess maybe I'm not seeing it, but how, do you have a separate rate for EMS since it's not showing up in this chart? EMS calls. Right here.
Yeah. See, that's the.
EMS calls are like the 1, 2,
They're all included. But
4. EMS calls are the 6 of them.
Okay.
yeah, there's a column there specific to EMS calls.
Oh,
For the total call volume.
thank you. All right, I got it now. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions at the moment?
Well,
Senator Clarkson?
so thanks, Scott. This is terrific. And it's very helpful, actually. This is the first time we've seen it all laid out like this. This is great for any district that we've been talking about. So let's take South Royalton. South Royalton, you bill a total to South Royalton of, if you add up those 3 columns, the town, I mean, those individual fire departments can't possibly, or the police department, I mean, they can't, is the town paying that total piece or are the individual departments paying that? I mean, I don't understand how they could afford that, but the town could afford it, but I don't understand.
Yeah, those are billed directly to those agencies.
And then in that case, that agency are they all grouped together and then paid for by the town?
It would be up to the individual municipalities, how they arrive at funding each of those departments within their jurisdiction. I believe some of the towns are different. For example, all of Hartford comes from its one general fund. I'm not sure how some of these are directly.
Yeah. Oh, okay, thanks. It's very helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, this is really great. Thank you for sending these slides along. Did you have more? There's a couple more slides. Did you want to?
There is. If you wanted to see more on how the fees, salaries work in the dispatch center, I just broke out some of the numbers. Senator White is correct. This is very similar to how we present our municipal budget. So these slides are readily available when we're doing budget adoption. But basically, salaries for this size center for 9 budgeted full-time positions, the communications IT specialist, and a manager is about just under $1 million in wages is what we're paying. And then an additional $157,000 in benefits for those individuals and personnel to run the center, excuse me.
Okay, great. Senator Watson has a question.
Yeah, thank you. So I was looking through the dispatch working groups report, and so it has an appendix that has, information about the formulas for different dispatching centers. And I was noticing in yours, you have got that there's a minimum charge of $8,000. Is that per town or per agency? And do you have anyone that only pays the minimum? I'm guessing not, but.
So I believe the fee structure that you have in that report has changed in Hartford since that was originally published.
Okay.
Yes, the fee schedule, the most current fee schedule and the methodology has changed somewhat slightly since that report was done.
Okay.
And the most current one is what I provided in my handout.
Okay, great. Well, I will update that. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, so we have the salary, okay.
So-
Oh, perfect,
actually,
yeah. Oh,
Well,
go ahead,
actually,
Senator
just
Watson.
as a matter of, just to follow up there, so do you have a minimum charge? Like, is there a base fee that you have at all right now?
Just the administrative fee, which is the 1.5% of the dynamic budget
Okay,
for
thank
the
you.
dispatch center.
Okay.
Great. So overall, are there things you think we should consider for at the state level if we're trying to create more uniformity?
I think, Scott and I had discussed that this question would come and how we would think to respond to it. We're kind of in an interesting geographic location of the state. We border New Hampshire. We work almost exclusively with the New Hampshire full-time departments that are located next to us. So there's a lot of cross communications, and we see how public safety works in New Hampshire. And I think when we struggle in Hartford, we understand that, call taking is a specific function of dispatch, which is answering the 911 calls, and dispatching is how dispatchers communicate with the boots on the ground, the first responders out in the field, managing those incidents. When we struggle, it's when we're overwhelmed with call taking. It's when we have to answer every 911 call that comes into the center. That's when things get backed up, communications get missed over the radio. You have incidents happening in the field where they're calling back to the center. The dispatcher can't readily respond on the radio because they're answering a call. And those happen occasionally, but if there's a fire going on in one or more of the communities, or it's a snowy winter day and you've got everybody calling to report slide-offs on the interstate, they get overwhelmed. New Hampshire does things a little bit different in that the state handles all the call taking and then sends the calls directly to the regional dispatch centers around the state. And that way they're just doing the dispatching piece and the call taking piece is removed away. I think that is an interesting concept. It seems to work for them. And when I talk to the people in our center, if they could be relieved of a burden at times when they're talking to personnel in the field, that the call taking sometimes gets in the way.
So the state does the 911 function in New Hampshire, and then they send that information to regional dispatchers. That's the way it works.
Correct.
Okay.
So if we stood up more regional centers around the state, provided either grant funding or things like that to do the dispatching for these communities, and the state provided the 911 call taking, that might be an option to consider.
Got it. Okay. Well, Chief, thank you so much for being with us today. We are behind schedule because this is such a fascinating topic and people have a lot to say and we have a lot of questions. But we appreciate you being here, and you have two able senators on this committee. So if you have other things you want us to know, you can send it to Olivia or talk to your senators, and we'd be happy to have you back after we have a proposal on the table for everybody to look at.
Well, thank you very much. And I would invite both my senators to come down and take a look at the Hartford Dispatch Center.
Yes, let's do it. Good. That sounds like a fun field trip.
Yeah, I haven't been since I reached.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You're very welcome. Take care.
For dispatch.
Hartford's the best.
Okay.
I'm just a
Well,
little
I mean,
biased.
I don't know.
It's not a competition, it's a uniform system of serving all Vermonters, we're hoping.
Okay, so we have, you guys, we're behind schedule, but we have our next two witnesses here in the room with us. So we're not too far behind if we can keep plowing through without a break. Are you guys okay that if you need to take your own personal individual breaks, go do that, but otherwise we're gonna keep going. Cause we,
I've now got my coat clipped around my legs
hold on,
to keep me warm,
Olivia's
so I'm not going
computer,
anywhere.
speaking, the irony is we just had a computer glitch here in the room, so I wanna
We
make
did?
sure we're still live.
I'll wait till Senator gets back.
Okay, yeah,
Do you want me to check, Olivia?
I'm looking here right now. Okay, the live is still going.
we're good. So if
Thank you.
Drew and Jim can come up and Roger, you can do some musical chairs there. We need to have music so that.
Cue that up for us.
We can just sing. Da, 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 da,
Hey, you know,
da, da,
thank you. Wow,
There you go.
I'm honored. Thank you.
What a gentleman.
That's snowing, but a picture.
It's
I thought it was
beautiful,
supposed
except
to
we
rain
have to
today,
drive
so it
home.
actually is colder than the umbrella. That's
My
nice.
phone says it is raining, but my eyes said it's snowing.
Yeah, it is snowing.
Okay, well, thank you guys. It's nice to have you back. Our pleasure. And well, you've heard a little bit of the conversation today. So, you know who we are. You sort of know what we're looking for, I think. So just tell us what you'd like us to know about dispatching from your perspective, or emergency communications more broadly from your perspective. And yeah, and what if we're gonna try to get to a more statewide uniform system, what you think we should do?
Okay,
First, introduce yourself for the record.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm Drew Hazelton, I'm Chief of Operations at Rescue Inc., and I actually also serve on Vermont's EMS Advisory Committee. So it's a wonderful topic that is very complicated, as I'm sure you're understanding now. And when, I guess the area I want to go is conversation is probably different than what you've heard a little bit.
Okay.
And I think it's worth understanding kind of where dispatch, the dispatching kind of fits in the greater scheme of healthcare and what we're currently facing. So as we know, 911 is the access point for a lot of people that are requiring some sort of medical intervention or mental health intervention. And because of that, what happens from that point forward makes a difference to everything in their course of care. So our traditional dispatch systems, which we're hearing a lot about, and a lot of our systems are very traditional. A 911 call comes in, it gets dropped in one of three buckets: a fire bucket, an EMS bucket, or a law enforcement bucket. Sometimes they spill into all three of those buckets. In our modern kind of response world, and what we're looking at in the future is a way to reduce the burden on specifically EMS and the overburden on our emergency rooms and our hospitals. We need the ability to have more buckets. We need a modern dispatch system, modern communication system that will allow us to take those patients that do have, they're not even necessarily patients, those people that do have legitimate issues, but maybe don't elevate to the point of needing what we would call like emergency services, the traditional law enforcement, EMS and fire service, and be able to divert those to alternative services. That doesn't exist in I sat on the dispatch committee, listened all summer, and I think there's a plug at the end of the report where I asked to make sure that we include modernizing the way that we do this work. In other parts of the country, they figured out a long time ago that by utilizing appropriate triage systems at PSAPs and by transmitting and communicating data, patients can get the care that they need in a reasonable amount of time. It also helps law enforcement in the sense that when we know we're dealing with patients that have a mental health history, the approach can be very different. And from an EMS perspective, when we know that we're dealing with patients that have a violent history, we may be able to do things differently. In the last few years, there's been a lot of changes in our approach to dealing with mental health patients, including policy changes by the Department of Public Safety that put our providers at risk because those responses are not automatic anymore. It used to include law enforcement and EMS responding to a lot of these mental health cases. Now we have a system that is quite often doesn't involve law enforcement and puts us into, for example, domestic or mental health issues where we don't have that law enforcement support. And I can steer you to some other systems around the country that have kind of figured this out if you want that information. But in a kind of the more modern way of dealing with this, we can have the ability to triage those calls at a PSAP or at a dispatch center and redirect those to mobile integrated healthcare projects, community paramedicine projects, mental health treatment, kind of more diverting away from the traditional emergency system and moving towards something that's modern. So I guess from what I'm asking is, as you consider investing a lot of money into our dispatch system, let's take it from 1970 and at least bring it up, 20 or 30 years. And what's interesting is as I go around the country,
We're gonna go 55 years.
Yeah, let's go.
So, and what's interesting, like I've met with, colleagues from all over the country, and we talk about the dispatch system and how it works in Vermont. And they are shocked that what we still have in Vermont, I think you heard some testimony earlier about how easy it is to dispatch EMS because we tell them that it's a call, we don't hear from them. It's really call notification. So we get told that there's a person in need. That's really the end of the information. There is no data transmission to us. There's no background information. We don't have the history of how many times we've been to this residence.
Yeah,
what are the
you're
interactions.
kind of going in blind.
Completely blind. And that system has been solved around the country utilizing computer-aided dispatch models and this interoperable communication and communication networks that allow our ambulances and fire trucks and police cars to have data pushed directly to them. It's done in a HIPAA compliant manner. It's done in a patient safety manner. And I'm hearing from our colleagues around the country that they've been doing this for 20 years. Where have you been? It's like, well, we're still making phone calls between dispatch centers to get resources. That's where we've been. Still a rotary dial down in our area. So that, I guess that was just kind of the new, I know you've heard a lot about what's going on. I just asked that as we go forward,
really great.
Let's step it up.
So this is really great. And I'm glad you brought this up because for a lot of reasons, but I've been meaning to ask somebody about this because my daughter brought this up with me and asked me, she's going to college in another state. And so she's learning how things work there. And she asked me, who makes the decision on who to call and are there alternatives to the three main possibilities or, who makes and I think I asked somebody this question before and it's sort of made at the 911 level to dispatch or how to call the dispatch, or what the nature of the call is and then they tell dispatch what the nature of the call is. But are there, what I think I'm hearing from you is that if somebody called and there's a sort of mental health crisis happening, you would love to have like our designated agencies as possible call, just they could be dispatched or some, homeless shelter people could be dispatched if it was a housing emergency or something like that. Is that what I'm hearing?
So there's, again, models as we look at things that are working, that's one area. So mental health is an area where we know that what we do is not in the best interest of our patients quite often. Because when you put that call into an EMS bucket, an ambulance is going to go to a patient's house. They're going to do the best they can to help treat that patient. And we're going to take them to an emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that's not the best place. And so we started a path. And that's why I say the dispatch center really, at this point, starts the progression in a way that is ending us, or taking us down a path that's really not the best path. And we could, as we, shoot for the stars here, make a dispatch center that the person on the end of the phone has the experience, the education, and the credentials to do the triage necessary to divert them from that traditional system. There are some people that are having a heart attack that need to be in the ambulance bucket and off to the hospital. Another example, and it's something we're working with our local hospital on right now, are people, for example, that have joint replacement. They are at home after having a hip surgery and they believe that their hip is infected. The best place for them to go is back to the surgeon that did their hip replacement, not to the emergency department, because the emergency department is a place where infections happen. It's not a place for that type of treatment. But again, in our current system, we only have one bucket. That's the ambulance bucket, and that bucket takes you to the emergency room. So as we move forward, I guess that was just kind of my comment. And then I know Jim will talk about the challenges that are already facing EMS providers with low reimbursement and funding, and adding fees for dispatching and what that's going to do.
Right.
That's his soapbox. So I'll let him
Okay,
go.
we're gonna let you get on your soapbox just a minute. We have some questions. Senator Yoski.
So I hear you and frankly agree that we might need more buckets, more options, but what does that do to increase complexity of dispatch?
That's a great question. With what I see happening here in Vermont, I think we're looking at fragmenting our system more. So I don't agree with the concept that we need to break up our dispatch centers more and more and more. So for example, in Windham County, we now have the state police dispatching, Southwest Fire Mutual Aid dispatching, Windham County Sheriff dispatching, Brattleboro dispatching, and Wilmington PD. So we have 5 dispatch centers in one county. All of those pulling resources to try to stay viable.
Yeah.
Well, if we were to truly regionalize those in some sort of magic formula that you guys are going to come up with that makes everybody happy,
Oh, gosh, yeah, you got it.
and we would have enough resources to have those specialized people that we need in those centers to make those decisions. In my world, in my ideal world, you didn't want something realistic. You wanted like the ideal, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I believe regionalizing those centers to a point where you can have the appropriate people. So it's not that, and I don't want to call taker make that decision. It's the nurse triage that works side by side with them that can make that determination. And then we can have an appropriate clinical determination versus right now, our mental health calls quite often go to a trooper.
Right.
And is that really the best place to be determining whether this patient really is going to commit suicide or not? I don't know how much training they get at the academy and, phone evaluation of mental health incidents, but it's probably about as much as we get in paramedic school. We're not clinical psychologists,
So, and that's that point that you're making is exactly what your testimony brought to mind, and a conversation as a clinical social worker that I've certainly had, in particularly around mental health crisis response being an additional emergency service, and taking that burden off of our police officers and our paramedics, because we don't have the training to respond, and we've seen pretty horrific things happen. But thinking through the dispatch lens, I just want to make sure that as we're having the conversation, we're thinking through so we don't make more complications and sort of create more burden within the system. But I agree wholeheartedly that there should be more buckets.
And if we were to create more buckets, and what is the mechanism? Because we're certainly not going to put out a bill that just automatically creates a new bucket,
Yeah.
I hope our drafting attorney is listening to this right now about creating buckets. But if we were to, who would we task to help move along the path to creating more buckets?
So the start as part of this bill is the ability to have, first of all, you have to be able to transmit and receive data. So our current dispatch centers, most of them, not all of them, don't even have the infrastructure in place to be able to share the appropriate information.
Yeah, did you hear Will Moran's testimony?
I did not. I was,
Yeah, you can-
Oh, you should watch
you-
it.
You probably heard from him before, but
You've
he's,
heard the testimony. before.
yeah, he was telling us about the.
yeah, so, as far as the dispatching bill, at least putting the groundwork into the bill that would
Yeah.
allow us to have the infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure to allow it. And then when you're looking at regionalizing, consolidating, whatever, making sure that we don't fragment it to the point where we're not likely to be able to have 27 clinical social workers available to answer phone calls. But if we were to whittle that down to 6 centers that were answering calls, it would be more realistic we could find the staffing to do that. So when I looked at, and kind of as part of this dispatching discussion, the number of dispatch centers we had across the state, I think makes any sort of future project pretty unwieldy. Because like, how do you have a nurse triage at every single dispatch center? Wyndham County has 5.
Yeah.
So those were the areas that I was looking at, and I was kind of recommending that maybe we redesign this with an eye on at least what's happening now and maybe even what's going to be happening in the future.
Okay, I hear you. Jim, you want to go on to your soapbox now?
Oh, I'm just gonna ask you.
Jim Leonard, President of the Vermont Ambulance Association. I just wanted to say a few things about this whole process. I've been on probably all the committees with Rogers since 30 years ago.
Yeah, we're gonna try not to make another study.
Since the last one. Not true too. But anyways, if you've seen one EMS service, you will hear that across the nation because we're all diverse.
Yeah.
I'm looking at dispatch centers. If you see one, because they all do it different and you're trying to do something. Whatever you do has to do a couple of things in my mind. First, on the technology side, they need to, whatever's being set up, look at money to make things better for the dispatchers and the people in the ambulances and police cars.
Sorry, look at what?
Technology, I said, that makes it better for the dispatcher as well as the people in the ambulances, police cars, fire trucks. But there's readily available technology out there that sends them the information and can be tied together.
Yeah.
Rather than pressing the button, putting the strain on, talking
Yep.
back and forth. And
That's what we heard from Will. We got the whole like
Okay.
extremely
so that's my
enthusiastic
first thing. He was talking about
Okay.
technology. It's a whole nother story, other centers and places that dispatch. That's another complication. But whatever you do, make it the technology works for the dispatchers as well.
Yep.
When I said you have seen one dispatch center, you've seen one dispatch center, you can already tell from all the testimony you're taking from everybody, they all do it differently. We need to make sure whatever you set up, the state Department of Public Safety doesn't want to do this. It has to be a system that's coordinated and works together and is figured out before you just say, here's a bunch of money, go do it. Because we don't want to go backwards, we want to go forward with something that works. And something that works for the people that we serve as well as our people. Everybody is on a personnel crunch. Where you will hear from me is, I think the system should be, I hear the governor didn't want to raise taxes. Who's paying for this? Somebody's got to pay for this. But it should be a system that says it's the most cost efficient, it's the best for everybody, there's redundancy that works with everybody, and we know it's going to work, but not just have it done before we know that those things are going to be done. It's got to be figured out, not just, well, we'd like to see this. It's got to be figured out.
Are you saying we need planning? We don't need a study, but we do need planning and we need a transition period.
I can talk from my area for one, that we use the state, we have forever, and
Yeah.
now they want to do away with it. We have some agency that may be interested, but how are you going to sustain it? Who's going to set it up? They say, oh, we have these plans from different areas. It's like, you need one plan that tells we all work together and this is the best way to do it. Not all of you go out and figure it out on your own. You really need to, they talked about this forever. You just can't throw, I mean, I've seen on the news some of the problems, giving out money or they're going to, and then they're pulling back. Or some towns say, we've been trying to do this for 25 years and now people look and say, well, that costs too much. I can't go to that. And they're pulling out.
Yeah.
You really need a plan before you hurt people or systems with a system that doesn't work.
Yeah, Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So do you have a recommendation on who should be overseeing all of this?
Roger.
Oh, yeah.
No, this is
My opinion.
Or what's best, I mean,
I think it needs to stay at a state level oversight. I know DPS is I'm gonna drive really slow on the way home because they don't want to. We've got to have, again, centralized coordination, and the only centralized thing we have in Vermont would be the state.
yeah. And so how do you envision the 911 board playing into that? That would meet the goals that you're describing. Maybe that's too direct of a question.
No, that's a good question.
No, I like that
I think
question. Go
it's
ahead.
fabulous.
Careful, Roger Marcoux right behind you.
So,
Please speak openly.
it's I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, and I think that that's what we're trying to figure out. So if there are folks who have strong opinions on this, like it would be good to know. I realize you all want to work together and you want to maintain those relationships and you don't want to necessarily put the weight on one organization over another. But it feels like what I'm hearing is that there should be more ownership at the state level for this to actually work well. And I think it will ultimately be very important that we hear from the stakeholders who are being affected by the system that that's the case. So it will be hard for, and I'm on my soapbox, I think it will be hard for us to make a case for the state to have a larger role if we're not hearing that from people who are impacted by it.
So I'll give you a couple of examples there. State coordination level. You may or may not know that in the event of a large incident in Vermont, we have no system in place to get multiple ambulances to you. So
I don't like knowing that now.
you don't. So yesterday's example.
Well, we don't need multiple ambulance going to one person.
No, when you have a major incident, so like yesterday, for example, we had a hoax, we had lots of potential. There is no centralized way that we can dispatch EMS resources across the state, with the exception of dispatch centers. You get phones and calling other dispatch centers and calling other dispatch centers and calling other dispatch centers. Is that the system that should be in place in 2023 in Vermont to manage a large scale event in the state of Vermont? I don't think so. And we have no way of knowing what resources are available at any given time.
Have you seen the movie The Grand Budapest Hotel?
I have not.
Oh my God, I love that
It's a
movie.
great movie, but there's this whole scene in the movie where there are hotel concierges calling another hotel concierge in another country to all respond to this one event. And it's literally a phone chain of them all calling. And when you were just saying that, that is what popped in my head.
That's what we have right now for dispatch, our dispatch center. That is Vermont's dispatch system right now.
We're gonna have to get that clip and I'll
Send it to
send
me.
it to you.
Sure.
I will send you that clip. I have somebody in my family who can make a clip like that. Anyway.
If it's less than X number of seconds long, I think.
Oh, yeah. Anyway. Sorry to interrupt you with a movie reference. Go ahead.
So, so and that's where I think this coordination really needs to happen. It needs to be consistent. Vermont's a small state. Any sort of event is going to go beyond local districts, beyond local county lines. And without that coordination, without that, carryover, without, common communication, we're going to end up like we did during Irene, where we were texting each other dispatch instructions as to where the next person that was stranded in the water was. And the only way that we could know where the Swiftwater team needed to be was a text message from one team to the next, which seems a little bit.
That was 2012, right?
Yeah, we're still doing it that way. Yeah.
August 20th.
I'd like to think we've improved. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, Jim, you had something to.
I just wanted to make sure I cover the bases of, when we hear that they charge this service, we have 990 services, first response and ambulance services, who do not have the budgets today to be able to comprehend or take it in. We already know they're underpaid and they're staffing and costs have gone up tremendously for everything. So they're in a crisis that way. They're in a crisis in personnel. I would not want to see 12 dispatch centers that are now looking for even more people that they can't find. Whatever they're doing has to be coordinated that fits the state, whether it's 1 dispatch, 4 dispatch, but there has to be that planning that I say. But you can't put the cost on the services. And one of the raised in EMS that I look at is even when you give it to the towns, it has to be a portion has to go to that service, that town's EMS service dispatch, if they were to bill it. There are 12 towns. And I don't want 12 of them picking out dispatches and doing it. It has to be, and I don't want to try to collect from 12 different towns and figure out, it's hard enough for EMS to just try and take care of their business.
Yep.
So if you can figure it out that it's a universal way that they're all getting enough money to do it right, with the right number of services that have the right backups, but not a.
Okay, well, this sounds like a really easy problem for us to solve, so.
Good job.
Excellent. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to move on to our
No,
next.
well, thank
witness.
you
You're
for the
welcome to
time.
stay and you can hang right there if you want. Our next person is on Zoom. And this is our last witness, and then we're gonna go back to Roger, who's gonna talk with us a little bit more. But Robert Schlachter from Rockland.
Hi, Bob. They're the old gang, but.
The old gang.
Yeah, that's great.
This is Butch's.
Yep.
Get to watch our technology in slow-mo.
Yeah. Robert, we see you're still connecting to audio. Oh, we can see you. Can you hear us? Chief, can you hear us? Chief Schlachter? We see you. Can you hear us? Hi, Chief. Can you hear us? Obviously not.
Can you hear us? Yes or no? Yes, no.
Nothing.
Olivia's typing to him.
Sign language.
I do actually.
Passive aggressive.
You speak millennial.
Passive aggressive.
He's the
No,
thumbs up.
no generation.
Chief, can you hear us now?
So there.
Oh, yeah, let's do the texting thing.
Are you calling him? Oh,
If he can see to answer it.
Oh, look, there he goes.
You reached 342.
no. Chief Schlachter? Am I saying his last name?
Yeah,
right? Is it
Schlachter.
Schlachter?
Yeah.
Okay,
Electric, yeah.
yeah, okay. Chief? Is he, can he?
Here is our technology.
It's kind of like us going out on an emergency call, very similar to this.
Oh,
It's just the meters and radios and we're,
Did you
are
guys-
you there? Are you there?
Yeah, did you set this up?
I bet they did.
Yeah.
Drew has got it. So Drew, if you model rating, do you have an ideal
Okay.
state that does this well? That you?
I've got a couple of people I can put you in touch with.
Okay, we need that. We need an ideal and how it works and how they got there. That would be great. Whoops, now we've gone back to Lou
I
Roger.
think he might be.
We're getting out of luck later.
Chief, our last witness.
Thank you for your
Pardon me?
time.
Chief, our last witness.
Yeah, Roger's gonna come back up and then we're gonna chat for a little bit. You have a 4 o'clock, we'll be done by 4. Okay,
Thank you.
Chief
Jim,
Schlachter,
thank you.
can you hear us? Chief? Hello? Can you hear us, Chief?
Can you text him?
Oh, he's waving, he's
Oh,
waving.
hi.
Can you hear us?
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can you unmute?
Sign language.
That's not silent.
Oh, he's just trying to.
Now Roger's getting it on.
That's body language. Or
So Jim, Drew, if you could send us your ideal.
maybe we,
Yeah, well, that would be-
There you have it.
we can't.
He doesn't look muted.
No, it looks like he never joined the audio.
Oh.
What's the problem?
Audio. I wonder.
His audio may be turned
Oh.
off. Your audio may be turned off.
Oh, Becca, brilliant.
This is not my idea, this is
Roger.
Roger's idea. What did it say?
Dispatch
Why
Maybe you could tell him he'd never.
Roger? I can't.
Join audio.
Communications expert.
That's like what I.
Could he read it? Or do we need it
Okay.
in older pen?
Wait, Olivia's gonna kick him out of the meeting and then make him rejoin, and maybe he will rejoin with his audio.
Okay.
Yeah, and
This may come up again for us.
Roger, did you tell him his audio might be turned off?
Well, we did the second iteration. Pull that up here.
Could he read it or do we need it in Flair pen?
Audio off.
Audio is off.
It's a new
I
way.
may have to go to a new page.
Oh, it looks like.
Oh, connecting to audio.
Oh, poor guy. I feel bad for him.
Great world paper and pen.
Oh, yay! Yay, are you there?
Yes, we are. Can you hear me?
Chief, thank you so much for your persistence in trying to connect. I'm so excited that you're here.
No problem.
So thanks for joining us today. We've heard from a bunch of people from around the state, and we're just interested for you to tell us how things work in Rutland County. We know that Rutland is kind of in a special situation, and we'd love to hear from your perspective where you're at, and then also your ideas for improving a statewide system, or creating a good statewide system.
Okay. First of all, I just would like to introduce myself, Robert Schlachter, and I am the President and Chief Coordinator of Rutland County Fire Mutual Aid. I'm currently a captain on the Killington Fire Department. Total of 50 years experience. I was chief of Rutland City and Rutland Town both during my career. Many departments here have volunteer firefighters in Rutland County. Rutland City obviously is the only career department at this point in the county. Very brief background here. Basically been involved with this state dispatch program since its inception in 1994. It's almost 29 years. During that time, a lot of great things were being done by what we call state dispatch, Department of Public Safety's dispatch folks. They do a tremendous job. They have for a long time. So it was working and growing, becoming better from basically 1994 until a couple of things happened. One of which was the consolidation of the Rutland and I believe it was Derby operations into the two state PSAPs right now, Westminster and Williston. So when that occurred, again, the staff has been phenomenal and the DPS personnel have been phenomenal on this as far as helping to make it work. But apparently after the consolidation and given the fact that we had the COVID situation for over 2 years and the new economy where it's hard to get employees to work in a number of fields. It's even more evident, obviously, in the emergency services. Being a call taker, dispatcher is, a complex job. There's no doubt about it. People's lives are on the line, and your job is really important, not only as a person receiving information from the public, but also from the responders and the law enforcement officers and EMS personnel out there in the field. Basically, the dispatchers are the conduit that takes the emergency call information that 911 gets and then gets it out to the appropriate agencies, and then also has assisted with getting additional resources, such as in the fire field, a large fire, we're going to call mutual aid resources and the like. So they've been very helpful in this area, but unfortunately, there are becoming fewer and fewer of them at this point at the PSAP, particularly in Westminster. So I think, first of all, I'll thank the committee and the various committees in the legislature who have started to take this and run with it, so to speak. We do have a need in Rutland County because when this all started, local answering service that was providing the service for many years decided very suddenly, 90 days notice, that they were going to stop providing the service for, at that time, 9 fire departments and I think 5 EMS agencies in Rutland County. We had to do something. So we started looking at different ideas and happened to stop at the Rutland Barracks at one point, and there was a captain there, I think, from the Brattleboro area, and got talking about it. And I said, it's a shame the state, won't take on this because I think it would work real well. And he said to me, well, actually, we're looking to do that. And my understanding was in part that it was to help increase the staff for state police at the dispatch centers. And we worked with them, and that's pretty much where it all started. And we've been doing that for, as I say, 29 years. Basically, what Rutland County is facing, we have, these are just, a few quick facts. 20 of the 27 fire departments in Rutland County are dispatched through state dispatch at this point. All of them right now are volunteer departments, small towns, small budgets, and I think we have 7 local law enforcement agencies that are also dispatched from there. And I think 6 EMS or maybe 7 EMS agencies, counting first response and the like, that are dispatched through Department of Public Safety's PSAP. So right now, when we got the word that basically they were, DPS was looking to shed the local side of the equation here. Obviously, it hit us like a bolt of lightning. I understand their desire to do this, and the fact that, yes, after COVID and the inability to get personnel and keep personnel, it has become an issue for them. But right now, I will compliment the department on the fact that they have been working with us to try to keep things going in a positive direction as we look at coming up with a different solution, and that would be a regional dispatch operation. Regional dispatch does exist in Vermont in a number of areas. It hasn't really been developed out of any particular statewide effort, but we're now at a situation where, using Rutland County as an example, we're looking to be able to set up a regional dispatch. Currently, the Sheriff's Department in Rutland County has expressed an interest in doing this. I've been working with a small ad hoc working group since this was basically announced to try to pull something together. And at this point, basically what we need is a couple of things. Obviously, money. Okay, because right now, the departments that are on this system, I don't believe are paying anything right now because there's always been a long process of trying to figure out how to charge for these services to local municipalities. And there have been efforts, I think, since about 2004 maybe, to do that. So that has not gone anywhere. And so the money's part of it from our end now, because right now, Rutland County Fire Mutual Aid provides the funds through a small assessment on the local agencies that we provide the service with state. And they have small budgets. It's very hard, recently when things got really desperate down at Westminster, the captain called and said, well, basically, I think we're gonna have to go over to, we put out the initial tone, and once a unit acknowledges, somebody from the department acknowledges, it's on you. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work well because we have a secondary problem, I think, in the fire and EMS services, and that is personnel. Even the full-time agencies are having difficulty recruiting and retaining personnel. And on the volunteer side, it's even worse. So we don't have the seasoned citizen who will go to the fire station and sit and man the radio, during an incident. And so state dispatch right now is a lifeline to the fire and emergency departments as well as law enforcement at the local level here in Rutland County. So what we're doing is we want to move forward in Rutland County. We've laid some preliminary groundwork. I was also on the state working group representing the Vermont Fire Service through my affiliation with the Vermont State Firefighters Association. And we were working with that working group. I believe it started maybe in late July after everything had settled. And we sent a report to the governor, I believe, by December 1st, along with the General Assembly. And that report tried to meet some of the objectives in the legislation that created it, but such a short time frame, and everybody working with that group, I think, found that there's a lot more complexity to this than meets the eye. So to do something here in Rutland, what we're looking for is transitional funding. We are looking for assistance, both legal assistance, possibly assistance from various committees in the legislature to help us come up with how we can structure this effectively and how we can fund this long term. The sheriff's office is interested, but certainly they don't want to take something on that is not sustainable. So that's something we need to work on. And I don't want to belabor the point here because, you have many things to do and you've heard from many people, but we are ready to move on to the next phase here in Rutland County, which would be formalizing our plans and then implementing our plans after we, know what the dollar and cent aspect of it's going to be and what resources are available. When this all started to take place, there were discussions, I believe it was with the commissioner at the time, Sherling, that they weren't going to just leave us out here hanging, and they were looking to get funds from a number of sources that would possibly be able to be used for the creation of one or more regional dispatch centers to kind of bring Vermont to the next level. So, as I say, Rutland is ready. What we basically need is funding to get started. It was originally discussed that possibly up to 2 years of funding for personnel and startup costs. Department of Public Safety technical assistance and access to their current systems that are what we're basically using to get our signal to the mountaintops and then back to dispatch and obviously to the departments out in the field. So there's going to be a need for some equipment updates and the like, and that's all, part of the initial startup. And I believe there was some money allocated for this purpose that the state working group was starting to look at how to use that effectively. And so we are where we're at, but we don't have a commitment yet of X amount. And certainly we can put together a budget for people to look at and, see what goes on. And the reason for the transitional funding is the communities here in Rutland County, the municipalities, have not been charged for the actual dispatch service. Again, that's decisions that were made at the state level at the time. And Rutland County Fire Mutual Aid, we provide the radio equipment on the mountaintops that are connected through the Department of Public Safety system to dispatch. And that's, a relatively small amount of money over the last 29 years to actually have some mountaintop transmitters and repeaters and the like that allow this model to work. So, there's some stuff there is also aging. And again, there's federal money apparently that may be available for this, as well as some possibly general fund or state fund money, my understanding is. So what we're looking for, let's get to that point because I know you folks have stuff to do. I'm looking for money to start and then sustain regional dispatch operation while we work with the communities involved to build into them having to pay for the service. So that's point one. Point two is a model for governance. And I guess the governor asked in the legislation that whatever whatever model is used or funding model is used, he did not want it to impact the property tax. So, there's an issue there that we certainly can't deal with. That's going to have to be handled at the administration level. And
Well, that's our job, the legislature.
I understand that. If you folks can agree on it with us working, I think, we can come up with a solution to the issues that we're facing right now. So basically, the other thing we need, as I say, is a governance model, maybe some legal or technical advice on how to do that, so that we aren't spending time on something that's not going to work. There are various models, I guess, municipal utility district or regional utility districts, regional solid waste and the like, that we could probably glean some information from on that. And then obviously, if we can find that sustainable source, it's going to be much easier to do this. But what we're asking basically the legislature and the House and Senate to work with us on this to come up with a reasonable solution that makes sure we don't lose any, anybody in the process as far as resources and the like. And, we do the best job we can for the citizens of Vermont and the visitors. I'm currently in Killington, and as many of you know, the ski industry, on some weekends, you can have 20,000 people in a community. And certainly, we're providing the emergency services for those folks. So when they call 911, somebody has to then take that information and get it out to the response agencies. And then if there's requests for mutual aid or other assistance, special resources, to make that all happen. So I know I've gone on here for a while, but it's just kind of a quick history, I guess, of how this all came about. So I would imagine maybe you have some questions, and be glad to answer what I can.
Thank you so much, Chief Schlachter. I'm glad we were able to get you in today to talk with us. You have a persistent representative here who's got your back, Representative Shaw. So just wanted you to know that. Are there any questions for the chief at this point?
I just have a quick one.
Norris, go ahead.
Chief Slattery, you had mentioned, which many people do, obviously, is all we need is money. Can you tell us what types of money other than, and how much money? What's it going to be? Do you have any program built out in this, or?
Well, we have some rough ideas on it. I'd like some time, if you're looking for that, to be able to sit down with the sheriff and some of the other leaders in our communities and flesh that out into a greater amount of detail. But, looking at it potentially on the operations side of things for personnel and all those things, you're looking for a 2-year period, probably somewhere in the vicinity of $2 million. Okay, and I know that sounds like a lot to people, but in today's world with personnel and the like, that can be relatively have a relatively major impact on whether we can get this going. And again, we have had discussions on, okay, if we had X number of dispatchers, current pay rates for dispatchers around the state, benefits and things like that, come up with a number. So, I'm giving a rough estimate right now, and we can certainly put together a more solid estimate. We kind of been on hold because basically waiting to see if money is going to be available at all. And, if we're going to be able to have the resources that were mentioned to us about, with the Department of Public Safety's communications infrastructure and the like, and technical support on these the projects. So we could have a budget together, I think, in a relatively short time. But I think the first issue is what is the willingness of the state of Vermont to support an effort like this, and it may be a model for other efforts that will occur around the state. It's not just us looking at this. There are other agencies also looking to help in their region with the local response agencies.
Thank you. There's one more question in the room, and then we're going to have to on, unfortunately. Go
So
ahead,
I-
Senator
Who's
Clarkson.
back?
Well, if you need to talk more at any point, I'll certainly make myself available to that. And
Okay. Thanks. Roger, Robert, you haven't mentioned technology really and what the technology needs are. I mean, you've mentioned, we need the governance model, we need the startup money, we need regional dispatch. What are the technology needs that you, because we've heard today a really terrific testimony from Will Moran about all communications technologies and how they have to speak to each other and have to be seamless and well coordinated. Do you also have a bullet about the technology pieces that have to be in place for this to work?
well, yes, we need to be able to, obviously, in our situation here in Rutland County, to be able to access our mountaintops for paging fire and EMS out, as well as doing radio work with local law enforcement. And obviously, DPS has a system right now that does serve the purpose. I'm sure there's new technology coming down the road every day, and that's something that years ago, you'd buy a radio and it would work for 45 years, and then you go buy another radio that worked for 45 years. Well, now technology is so far advanced and changes very quickly. So again, for that purpose, we'd want to involve somebody who is very knowledgeable in the actual radio technology area to assist in making sure we get the right equipment at a reasonable cost to safely and effectively, not only to each agency, but also interoperability, which was a big project a few years ago between law enforcement, fire, and EMS. For example, right now, we have a car accident here in Rutland County. Having the central dispatch capability right now with VSP, they can dispatch a trooper to the accident. They can dispatch the local fire department to the accident and local EMS agencies to the accident. And then, we're all working together, and it just avoids redundancy and the like. So again, technology, there's tons of it out there, and I can't even begin to say that I'm an expert on what's out there right now. We have something that has been working for close to 30 years, but it is time to look at, what resources are needed, and maybe not just for our district, maybe for a number of the other agencies that provide regional dispatch around the state of Vermont right now.
Well, thank you so much, Chief. And we'll be in touch if we need you to come back and talk with us again. Thanks for all of your work down in Rutland, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time. And again, if specific numbers are needed, that's the next step we're working on down here.
Well, great. Once you get that, if you're willing to share it with Olivia, that would be helpful. And we can
Well, I think it's important that we do share that, so I will do so.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Chief. Take care.
And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we are back to Roger. If you want to finish, I think, is Maria still there or not? Okay. I think our legislative council attorneys is also listening in. Hey, Maria. We're behind schedule, of course, so sorry about that. Thanks.
She's used to us.
Yeah, she knows how we roll. So Roger, we cut you off before, so why don't you pick up wherever you want to.
Okay, I'll make it.
Thank you for hanging out with us all.
I'll make it brief. No, it was very educational, actually. First thing I had said that I would do is be certain that the Department of Public Safety remains the default for any communities that have a disaster or whatever need emergency dispatch. And that means keeping that capability. Secondly, and this is going to be point of contention with a lot of different agencies, but it costs money to dispatch. Everybody has got to build that in their budget, and it's 2023. You got to pay for it. Next thing I would do is I would reestablish Derby, which the people in this state built or spent a lot of money building. Partly, back in those days, institutions, the testimony was around having that building that way so that it could accommodate dispatch. And this is not to take away from from Chief Bingham's operation. There's still a whole Northeast Kingdom, Caledonia County, and everything that can serve. The next thing is to work with the Department of Public Safety so that when they're planning for their new building in Clarendon, that has dispatch capability. Now, the trade-off for that is to take some of this $11 million and make sure that the Department of Public Safety has the money to do this correctly. In return, we need statutory language or something codifying that we're not going to end up with a one-off commissioner that just arbitrarily decides to cut a communications capability in the state by 50%. And with respect to these two dispatches, I think this Department of Public Safety has said, in some of my 911 meetings, they're down 30%. They could move some of those empty positions to those areas like Derby that have a high unemployment rate. And I think both in Derby and the Rutland area, those people would like, we could do some jobs down there. So I would do that. And I would freeze. This is all the same thing. What we really need to do out of this committee is we need to institute a governance model at the very highest level with working people, not with commissioners that are going to send proxies or what have you, with people that know the business, fire, EMS, police. And then in that, we need to develop a governance system, and then we need to identify where does it make sense in this state to have regional dispatches and all of the questions that surround us, because this committee, I'm overwhelmed with information. I've been doing this for a long time. So have somebody doing this work, and then you can address buckets. I think that Drew was talking about. You can address funding. You can have a subcommittee looking into that and technology and what have you. But to throw, a total of $20 million out without a comprehensive statewide plan, it's too hodgepodge,
So if I may, Roger, at the state level, I hear you about the DPS needs to continue to have a role and to conduct more of a role than they may be having right now. What about, and the regional governance model? So I'm gonna ask you the question that Senator White asked before. Where do you see the E911 board and the 911 operations?
So I see E911 as a well-functioning organization. And whatever we do, let's not create a situation where it's anything but that.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see a parallel with a dispatch in the future, with a dispatch board, if you will, made out of representatives like the E911 and maybe all in under one roof.
Mm-hmm.
But E911 has a lot going on, and they can't take the board. They can't take this on. Now, I could see a lot of people that are on 911 board on a dispatch board, but I would keep them separated for now. But you're looking to replicate success of E911 with the dispatch.
Mm-hmm.
A big problem for E911 is our funding, the way that we receive funding with the Universal Service Fund. That's antiquated now.
Yeah.
So, but currently that's what makes 911 different than dispatching, is that 911 is totally funded by the state. Dispatching is a hodgepodge of everything from a 3-person police department that has a dispatcher to a regional dispatch like mine.
Right. Okay. Senator Watson?
So you mentioned there was an umbrella in there, or under having things under one roof. So you would see the 911 board as potentially a parallel to dispatch, or are you seeing them one being sort of underneath or over the other?
No, just a parallel.
Just
for now.
parallel. Okay.
We really need to get organized in the dispatch side of things. And, you know, I've been around as long as anybody and I don't have all the answers for that. But if you put all of the best minds together that we can, you know, then I think that's really the only way to answer all of these questions is put the best minds together. You know, especially if we can compartmentalize it. Look, this is how we peer tape funding, this is how we peer tape, you know, the way we do dispatch EMS. And because everybody has their areas of expertise.
Well, so I think the funding question in large part is the legislature's job to figure out. And I'm wondering, I'm going to push you a little bit more on the 911 thing, because I hear you that it's working well and you don't want to mess with something that's working well. And I don't think any of us want to mess with anything that's working well. But I think there's also potentially an argument that because it's working well, they may have the capability of taking on some of the work because they are so good at what they do. And 911 and dispatch is obviously related in the larger umbrella of emergency communications. So
Are you talking
they
about
911,
the board?
the board and the entity. So not only you as the governing board, but the staff, obviously with additional resources. I'm not saying we're going to add it to their plate without giving them anything, but if we were able to come up with additional resources and maybe expanding the board or something, could that make sense?
Yeah, I really depend heavily on Barb Neal.
Yeah.
She's very, very sharp. And we would not want to blow any smoke your way. We would actually, Barb and I talk every week.
Yeah.
And we would, all right, how does it look? How could we make it work? Because everybody now on the staff is busy with their jobs. I understand we're going to get new people, but you know, it would be more, we'd have to look at it to really be truthful with you instead of me just saying, yeah, we could do it.
Yeah, and I know you haven't run it through them, but I think it might be helpful to us for you to run it through Barb and your board and see, is there a model where maybe it's an expanded board and obviously an expanded staff where the purview is not just 911, but emergency communications more broadly?
So what if it was an expanded board, but, all right, we've got a fire rep for 911, and then the fire service gives us a rep for dispatch specific. Under one board chair or something like that, so that there's coordination or whatever. Again, you know, this is Barb and my concern, and you get that, but you know, I think she's gonna chew me out later, but I think we're up for anything that will help.
I think because one of the things that we tend to do in state government is create more boards and commissions and committees, just like we do with let's do another study. And so if there is a way that we can use an existing highly functional board and highly functional entity to help solve another problem. And if the answer is no, I'm open to that answer, but if the answer is we might be able to do it with these things, then I would love to hear that.
One thing you're not gonna get out of Barbara or me is no, we won't do it, or yes, we will, knowing that we're taking on too much. We'll have to figure a way to get to yes, and then tell you what we need to be able to do it.
Okay, and we don't want to mess with 911 because it is clearly working well, and it's in some ways a model for what we should be doing on the other end of it. But you know, and if you have an alternative proposal, and then where does DPS sit within the sort of oversight? And because they have a division or department or some division, I think, of emergency communications there. And so they also have staff that have.
There's been talk about putting 911 in DPS. My issue is we go from commissioner to commissioner with different ideas and things like this. What's been talked about in the past is that the current 911 board would remain as it is now, but we still answer to the commissioner, or if it's ever made an agency, the secretary. And if that person says, all right, we're gonna get rid of Derby and we're gonna get rid of Rutland, then you're the boss. And it's not truly independent.
Well, I mean, we can put statutory guardrails around that kind of thing. And I mean, one model that you and Barb might look at, and I know Barb is at least somewhat familiar with it, is the new broadband board and the way that that's sort of structured within DPS, the other DPS. Yes, and whether there's some model that could work, and they are more or less an independent board, but within the auspices of public service. So think about that and see, you know, what might be able to work there.
So let's say that, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, and then I'll go to Senator.
Let's say that we did somehow have a system where we had the 911 and dispatch over here under one roof. And we think the best thing for the people in the state of Vermont is to put Derby and Clarendon back into the fold, which is against what the management of DPS wants. How would that be resolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on how we define the board in statute and how we define the relationship with a commissioner or a secretary and the governor and the legislature. So that, you know, I think that we obviously can't game out every single scenario that might come up, but we can certainly think about how that might work. And there may be other there obviously are other models, but just trying to think of how do we have statewide oversight of a system that is competent and accountable as well.
And is more inclusionary. And includes technology experts, EMS experts, fire and police. I think that is what I hear you saying, Roger, that for this to be effective, efficient, and work better, it needs all those voices at whatever the table is, whether it's a parallel board, whether it's a board that incorporates those areas of expertise.
I think those are the users, and they have to have more than
and the enablers.
They have to have a voice.
Yeah, and they don't at the moment.
And here's another thing that came up today. Mr. Moran's very articulate overview. There is a significant difference between urban Vermont and rural Vermont. In my area, I get places we don't have a cell phone coverage, let alone pushing data out.
Well, that's why the technology piece is so important to have represented in every one of these discussions.
So,
and I would also say that, you know, what Drew was saying about the other buckets, and they're not really represented right now, and wanting to make sure that somebody from those buckets, we're gonna forever think about these buckets, are represented as on a new emergency communications system statewide, so that we can grow into those areas as things get running.
So if I'm the board chair, and I say, hey, Drew, tell me how to do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
So, because that's not, everybody has an area of expertise.
Yeah, we're clearly finding that out. Senator Watson, did you have a question?
I do not.
Oh, okay. I thought I had Senator Biehoski.
I certainly appreciate, Roger, that you would reach out to Drew, but what I worry about is if you were to win the lottery and move, and the chair that takes over for you doesn't know that Drew's the expert. So I would really want to make sure that we actually brought that expert to the board and gave them a spot at the table.
All right, so you're talking about a board to govern this. Before we even get there, this is like when the state set up the 911 system. there was all these stakeholders and everything that came to the table for years, for a couple
Yeah.
of years.
Yeah.
And finally got everybody to agree with. But then once they did, it seemed like very arduous at the time. But once it came together, it's been great ever since. But it was because of the inclusivity of everybody.
Right, and I think that's a big key, and as I've been thinking about this, is the transition also, like from, how do we get from A, where we are now, to B, where we wanna be, and a lot of it, there's a lot of work that has to happen in between, and maybe that's where the inclusive, you know, and the subcommittees and the, you know, whatever would come into play, and we can spell a lot of that out in legislation, so it's clear what's supposed to happen and who's supposed to do what.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, anything else? Thank you for hanging out with us. It's been a pleasure, and come
Nice
back
afternoon.
anytime and join our table. Maria, I think that we've already lost a committee member, but I'm sorry if you were hanging out with us and not doing something else you should have been doing. Are you okay? I think that what we'll do is that Senator Watson and I are gonna put thanks, Roger, take care. We're gonna put our heads together and reach out to you, and maybe the three of us can sit down next week. We have this on, we're gonna try to get back to this next Friday, is that what we said, Olivia? So next Friday, we were hoping to get back to it maybe with a rough draft.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll be in touch.
Great.
All right, thank you, Maria.
Yeah, you're welcome.